Welcome to Thought to Action, presented by the London Center for Policy Research, where we delve deeply into important issues, examine ideas, and discuss solutions, and put our thoughts into action. If you enjoy our videos, please like, share, subscribe, and join our Patreon community, where you can participate in our Thought to Action, Ask Us Anything extravaganza that we do once a month, where we have all the questions come in and you can ask us anything. Today, I'm joined by Lieutenant Colonel retired Tim Wilson, who served in a military far, far away. At one point was our adversary, but because of the amazing resilience of our culture, our differences were overcome, both strategically and tactically. And here we have Tim Wilson working as our lead on the Second Amendment project for the London Center. Tim, welcome to Thought to Action.
Thanks, Tony. Glad to be here.
So we're going to talk today about one of the most important enshrined rights we have as American citizens, which the British don't have anymore. I mean, it's kind of like, are you kidding me? But the fundamental idea that we have a God-given right to defend ourselves, and to defend ourselves, we have the right to pick the method that we wish to use. So let's talk a little bit today about where the concealed carry permit, or basically the right to carry it all, is going. So over to you to talk about what's going on with the Supreme Court and what you think we should be looking at right now.
Okay, well, the big news of the week was the Supreme Court agreeing to take the case, which is basically about concealed carry permitting and the problems specifically almost in New York City, although the lawsuit is against the whole of New York.
Right.
On permitting to get guns for concealed carry in particular, but any sort of gun in New York City. And this case has been decades in the making, and it's built up. There's been an element as well of the 14th Amendment with equal protections rights. And of course, there's been a lot going on, especially over the last year, with the entire concept of the right to self-defense. But in New York City, it's particularly hard to get a permit for a gun, and it's expensive. The whole process costs well in excess of $1,000. It takes anywhere from 6 to 9 months, and the actual issuance rate is incredibly low. They reject claim after claim because they claim that to have a gun in New York City, you need to show a good reason why you should have a gun. The fact that the crime rate, the murder rate there is climbing back up to where it was in the 70s doesn't seem to matter. The threat is there for sure, but to anybody with any common sense, but the authorities do not like to issue gun permits. And that now is finally hitting the Supreme Court, which is a great thing.
Right. So to that point, I think we've talked about on Thought to Action, and I talk about this publicly all the time. I could carry a gun anywhere I can legally. I went on a short trip to a state that has reciprocity over the last few days, had no problem. But what's ironic, in many of these places I travel, Tim, I don't really feel I need to be armed because the crime rate is so diminished, because the concept is so well insinuated in the culture I go to. Everybody may be armed, maybe not, but nobody challenges because the chances are pretty good. You may be in a situation where you pull a gun for a criminal act. If you're a criminal, a law-abiding citizen is going to come back at you instantly and stop it. And this has been illustrated in Texas, where there were 2 attempted mass shootings, where one guy just pulled out his Sig Sauer and shot the guy in church. Another guy was able to put down an former Air Force guy who had a vendetta, used an AR to do it. Those are great examples of where armed citizens were instantly able to stop what would have been far more tragic circumstance.
And in that same vein, Tony, I have to raise the issue as well of the McCloskeys in Indianapolis,
right,
who didn't even pull a trigger. Nobody got hurt, but how much of that was due to just the display of weapons?
So that's the point. So the 2 points I'm taking away from your discussion of the registration and approval system in New York is it's racist because you're presuming that people can just come up with $1,000 and get it. And because you have such a predominance of low income folks, many of those are minorities, you've instantly set up a law that disadvantages those, who they want to vote with no ID. But boy, howdy, you try to exercise a right, you've got a Jim Crow situation.
That
right?
same place is also extremely sexist, because of course the number of females that apply and get turned down as not having a good reason is way higher than it should be. And again, it's the minorities and women who under threat from have a higher threat of domestic violence, should we say, owing to their social circumstances, their economic circumstances, and they get turned down at a huge rate. So they have no means to defend themselves against violence.
Which brings me to my second point. One of the places that I cannot carry as a private citizen is Manhattan, which is one of the places I would want to carry for obvious reasons, because the crime rate has literally skyrocketed. I mean, everybody uses these terms of this is skyrocketed. Anybody who pays attention to any of the headlines coming out of New York will see that there's a mass increase.
Shootings are up over 300%.
Yeah. So to that point, and this goes to my next point regarding the question for you to explore is our concept of the minimum response, the minimum necessary response, the MSR, minimum standard response, that we promote as a center. It's like, and the basic idea is if you go into any given location, any jurisdiction, your Second Amendment should go with you. You should have the franchise of that right. And right now, because of Joe Biden and others, the idea of universal franchises does not exist, which means that you are a lesser citizen. If you come out of Virginia and go to New York, you are considered a lesser citizen.
Even if you're from upstate New York. Yeah, I have a permit in upstate New York. I am not allowed to carry in Manhattan. And I carry whenever I can because I feel threatened by places like Manhattan.
Right. So the very places you'd want to carry because it's out of necessity, you are prohibited because of left-wing policies which say no guns, which then ensures only criminals and terrorists are armed.
And I must just say at this point, you talk about left-wing policies. Back in 1994, Congress passed the assault weapons ban.
Right.
Before that ban, the rate of use of rifles in violent crime was, I think, 4.6%. During the ban, it actually rose to 4.8%. After the ban, it dropped to 3.6%.
Yeah.
In other words, that ban was demonstrably unhelpful. It does not save lives. It actually causes more problems than it creates.
No, I'm with you. And I think that's where we, as an organization, are the organization of science and statistics. We don't get emotional about this. And that's the issue. How do we then move forward now, Tim, to deal with this? Because it's very clear that the left uses emotion. They bring up these pictures, these scary pictures of ARs, like, oh, this is, while I know, you and I both know the weapons I used in combat, while it looks similar, do not perform the same. They are not the same weapon. And
an assault weapon has a fully automatic capability, which none of the weapons we're talking about do.
Yeah, so when you step away from the technology and the emotion that they use, even the statistics, even those things which they say they're the party of science, which they're not, and the idea that they follow the science, which they don't, there's no evidence that any banning of any class of weapon has ever had any effect on preventing gun violence. But what has had an effect is limiting the ability of law-abiding citizens to be armed.
Absolutely,
and that's what it shows. So what do we need to do now going forward? Two pieces. Let's comment on what you think the Supreme Court's going to do and what you think we need to do to move forward on this issue.
if I may just step back quickly to talk about the minimum standard response that we've come up with in the London Centre, first of all, that's the sort of idea where we're trying to suggest to law-abiding citizens, i.e. the vast majority of American citizens, the correct and proper way. You and I both have the experience, we've been trained in it almost instinctively to know how to react.
Right.
The average citizen does not know that, but this idea of a minimum standard response matrix gives them an idea of the reactions that are realistic and effective. And in the same way, we in the London Centre are working hard to come up with practical working solutions. We all want to reduce gun violence. Sure, we want to reduce violent crime, no question. But my data background there drives us towards the fact that reducing the number of guns available to law-abiding citizens doesn't work. And guess what? You bring in new laws, the criminals don't obey them either.
That's right.
All you're doing is increasing the risks to law-abiding citizens and improving the odds for criminals who do not like armed citizens. They do not,
no, they tend to get in the way of their criminal activities. Imagine that.
Exactly.
So
if I may, two other quick aspects. One is the international aspect, my British experience, where we've talked about this before, but the bottom line is home invasions in Britain are quite common, and the criminals admit that they like the people to be there because it increases their chance of getting wallets and purses and extra gain and no threat. In this country, criminals tend to avoid home invasion when they know the homeowner is there because they're frightened of being shot.
Great points and true. So with that said, then let's cap this off with your prognostication of the Supreme Court. Where do you think this is going? And you don't, I'm not going to hold you to whatever happens, obviously.
Absolutely.
But what are your thoughts on where you think?
We all know better than to hold our breath on this, but I am hopeful that this is one where at least places like Chicago and New York will be told by the Supreme Court that they are being overly restrictive. And that the system that they have for licensing citizens is unacceptable. And I would just make the point, governments always overreach step by step by step. If they get away with, and they have for a long time, limiting our access to the Second Amendment, how long before they start to limit our access to things like the First Amendment?
Well, look, I don't want to get off topic, but I believe the raid on Rudy Giuliani's apartment was all about the First Amendment.
Yep.
This is not about his being an agent of a foreign power. As you all know, I've dealt with Rudy, and I don't believe for a minute. Well, I've not spoken to him directly about this. I don't believe for a minute he did not cooperate fully with the FBI's investigation of Ukraine. And the idea here that a raid had to be conducted is more punitive based on his First Amendment actions regarding Hunter Biden. So what we're saying here actually links to that. The second links to the first. The first is protected by the second.
Yep.
So I think it's very important, and I hope the Supreme Court will see the wisdom that you're laying out here. So
I will just say I'm pretty confident that they will. They almost have to.
Yeah. I hope so. Let's hope. So, okay. Well, Tim, thank you for joining us today for Thought to Action. And thank you all in the audience. Thank you for being here and listening. Please be sure to check us out on all of our social media, Twitter, LinkedIn, Facebook. If you like the content, please share, subscribe, join our Patreon community to make sure that you can ask Tim and I questions that we go about answering on our Ask Us Anything. It's always a very fun romp around the policy world. And also, as you come and participate in our activities, be sure and check out how you can support the London Center. One of the things that you all, as our subscribers and viewers, need to do is join us. This is something that we need you to help us with. As we've outlined here today, most of what we do, if not all, has to do with putting practical policy into action. Those actions protect your rights, and that's why we're here. So, Tim, thank you. And I'm Lieutenant Colonel Tony Shaffer, President of the London Center, and thanks for joining us for this episode of Thought to Action.